Hello everyone, this is Andy Crofts and welcome to episode 11 of the Terror Cellar. Today I have 3 great little stories for you which I know you're going to love. So sit back, put your headphones on, dim the lights and get ready for story number 1, Red Orbs. It was a chilly autumn evening, with the last traces of sunlight just barely fading beyond the horizon. My brother decided to take his dog, named Max, for a walk along a well-known road in our town Wexford in Ireland. This road had a certain reputation, one that anyone local knew. It ran right by the remains of an abandoned hospital, a place with decades of stories and strange happenings woven into its crumbling brick walls. People would often share tales of strange sightings, unexplained noises and eerie sensations as they passed by. But my brother, never one to let a ghost story get to him, shrugged it off as just another evening stroll. As he neared the hospital, the air seemed to change. The usual chorus of evening sounds, the distant hum of traffic, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves seemed to grow quieter, almost muffled. He could make out the silhouette of the hospital against the dimming sky, its jagged windows shattered and dark, like vacant eyes staring into nothingness. Ivy crept up the side of the building, wrapping around it like nature's attempt to hide something it would rather forget. Just as he was about to pass the building, my brother suddenly felt it. A cold, firm hand on his shoulder. His blood froze. His first thought was someone must be behind him. Maybe a passerby or someone who needed help. He quickly spun around, bracing himself to see a face or maybe to hear a voice. But there was no one there. Just the empty road, stretching out behind him in the darkness. He took a deep breath, told himself it was nothing more than his imagination or a trick of the nerves, and continued on. Max, however, began to act strangely. His ears pricked up, his gaze fixated on the hospital as if he sensed something my brother couldn't see. My brother tried to brush it off, but his pace quickened a little more than usual as he continued down the road. Eventually, he reached the end of the road and turned back, needing to pass the hospital again to head home. His heart was still pounding, but he was determined to keep his cool. He walked briskly, Max tugging a bit more at the leash, almost as if urging him to hurry up. But just as he was about to pass the hospital for a second time, he felt it again. A distant tap on his shoulder, this time on the side closest to the building, as if something within those dark, empty windows was reaching out. He turned once more, half expecting to see a hand reaching towards him, but there was nothing, except 2 glowing red orbs staring back at him. They hovered there, silent, unblinking, as if they were aware of him, watching him and following him. His mind raced. Were they eyes? Or something even stranger? Something he couldn't understand. He couldn't stand to look at them any longer, with fear overtaking him completely. Without a second thought, he bolted, pulling Max along as he ran down the road. He didn't look back, didn't pause until he finally reached the safety of home. To this day, he swears he felt something in that tap on his shoulder. Something more than just an eerie coincidence. And those red orbs? He says they weren't like anything he had ever seen. Thank you, Orion, for sending in that cool story. What a strange little event that is. To see 2 apparitions, 2 red orbs. I mean, were they eyes? Were they watching you? Was it the spirit of people following you? Did they come from the hospital? It must have been linked with the hospital, right? The old abandoned, strange asylum kind of building. Do you know what I mean? So that's a great little story. But now for story number 2, Whispering Children. I work at an old historic hotel in Oxford, England. At the time, I was new to both the job and the team. I was eager to prove myself, so I tried to go above and beyond in every task. Being on reception, I'd often step away to handle guest requests or help out around the hotel. The regulars liked seeing a friendly and familiar face, so I didn't mind. At the time, I didn't know the other staff well. They were all polite and friendly enough in passing, but I was still a bit shy. One perk our manager offered us was the option to use empty rooms for lunch breaks as long as they were kept clean and tidy. I thought it was a great idea. A quiet break in a cosy room seemed like the perfect way to unwind. One rainy afternoon, I was ready for my lunch break and decided to find an empty room to relax in. I checked the computer and found one available in the oldest and most isolated wing of the hotel. It was a bit of a walk, but I didn't mind. I was looking forward to some quiet time alone. The room I was looking for was at the very end of the hallway, tucked away in a corner. As I reached for the door, I started fishing through my pockets for the key, when suddenly I heard it. Whispering and faint giggling from inside the room. I froze, pressing my ear closer to the door to listen. But the sounds were faint, almost playful. I wondered if there maybe had been some mistake and that perhaps the room was occupied after all. To be safe, I went back to the reception to double check the booking system. But it still showed the room was vacant. So I returned to the room and this time there was complete silence. I even pressed my ear against the door again. But nothing. Feeling a bit braver, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was perfectly made up, with beds neatly tucked ready for the next guests. To keep things tidy, I took a seat in one of the chairs by the table and pulled out my lunch. I grabbed the remote to turn on the TV, and just as I did, I heard it again. Children's laughter and hushed whispers. I quickly looked around the room and out the window, but of course, there was no one there. Then the sounds began again, this time coming from the bathroom. My heart started racing. I crept toward the closed bathroom door, every nerve on edge, and slowly pushed it open. The room was empty, no one there, but both sink taps were running at full blast. I quickly turned them off, wiped down the splash water, and took a deep breath to steady myself. Just as I turned to head back to my seat, I heard the whispering again, this time coming right from where I'd been sitting moments before. My heart skipped a beat and I realised I was in way over my head. I started packing up my things, ready to get out there as fast as possible, when suddenly there was a knock at the door. Then I heard what sounded like small feet running down the corridor. I ran to the door, peered through the peephole, and as you can guess, no one. I opened the door and glanced down the hallway, but it was completely empty. Not a soul in sight. At this point, I was torn between fear and suspicion. Was someone playing a prank on the new person? It certainly seemed like the perfect setup. When I finally got back to reception, I asked the other staff if anyone had been messing with me, telling them about the whispers and the laughter. They all shook their heads, looking at each other knowingly. Then someone mentioned that they avoided that old part of the building as much as possible, as it gave everyone the creeps. After that, I never took my lunch break in one of the hotel rooms again. Thank you, Kathy Miller, for sending in that great little story there. Well, I guess with hotels, they have had thousands and thousands of guests in over the years, and especially if it's an old hotel, God knows what's happened in that time. And it must attract some kind of entities having all that energy over the years that have passed through the building, it's bound to have something. So that's a great experience you had there. I'd like to know if anyone else has heard anything else. And now for story number 3, The Walking Ghost. I worked at St Thomas's Hospital in London for years. Day to day, you're so busy that you don't notice much around you. You're always hurrying down long corridors, turning one corner after another, and trying to see as many patients as possible. But when night falls, the whole place changes. It's dead silent, and the hallways stretch out into the shadows, feeling like they go on forever. Let me tell you about my uniform. It's just your usual modern scrubs, the loose fit pants with the V-neck drawstring top, and what you see on TV basically. I worked mostly night shifts, which meant I got used to the quiet and the eerie feeling that settles over the place after dark. Even though you'd think you'd get used to it, sometimes it can feel like the building itself is watching you. One night, I was on a shift that had me crossing the hospital several times. It was quiet as a tomb, every sound amplified, so that my footsteps echoed like they were the only sound for miles. At some point, I had to deliver paperwork across the hospital, which meant going down one of the longest, darkest corridors in the building. I started my walk, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. Partway down the hall, I saw a woman. Just a figure at first, distant and shadowy. She was just standing there, maybe 100 feet ahead of me, perfectly still. I could only hear my own footsteps, which was strange, because usually even the tiniest sounds echo through that space. She started walking toward me, slowly, with this stiff, unnatural posture, and as she moved closer, I noticed something was strange. At first I thought she was a nun, and when she moved under the lights, I saw her outfit clearly, a black cape, a white apron with a red cross on her chest, a greyish-blue dress underneath, and a small white cap perched on her head. It was nothing like the uniforms we wore, but there was something about her. She looked like she belonged there. It was almost as if she'd come out of another time. I felt a chill creep up my spine, but I thought, alright, maybe she's part of a historical reenactment or training or something. So I just kept walking, hoping she'd glance up and give me some clue to who she was. When we were just a few feet away from each other, I went to say, hello, but her gaze didn't even waver. She just kept looking straight ahead, her face pale and rigid, almost doll-like. She was so close that I could see her eyes, and they were empty, dark, like she was staring right through me as if I wasn't even there. As she rushed past, my skin prickled up, and I turned back just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. But she was gone, vanished, as if she'd melted into the walls, and the corridor was long enough that she couldn't have gone anywhere. I stood there, completely frozen, trying to make sense of it. I kept telling myself she must have just slipped into a side door or something. But there were no doors. There were no doors along that hallway. Then, just as I was trying to shake it off, I glanced forward, and there she was again, at the end of the corridor, turning the corner. I felt every hair stand up on the back of my neck. My legs were shaking, but I sped up, almost running, desperate to get out of that corridor. Later, after catching my breath, I couldn't shake the memory of the experience. So I did some digging and found out that her uniform was a match for a 1940s World War II nurse's uniform. St Thomas had been bombed during the war, and many doctors and nurses lost their lives right there in those hallways. Turns out, I wasn't the first one to see her, but I may have got closer to her than most. I think about it all the time now. Her empty eyes, that stiff, otherworldly way she moved. And sometimes I wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was waiting for me to join her. Thank you, Janet Wright, for sending in that great little tale there. I'm sure that most hospitals, if not all of them, are booming with spirits. Can you imagine the amount of people that go in that hospital and don't come out? You know, the thousands of people over time. Thousands and thousands. So the spirits must be all over that place. And to pick out certain ones, such as this 1940s nurse, is really fascinating. And as we've said in different shows in the past, you know, what was she doing? Was she continuing her work in her own dimension? Was she just carrying on the day as she would? Or was she just revisiting her old place? I guess we'll never know these things, but I find it fascinating that I'd say most spirits we'll see are sort of spirits of the past. It's very rare that you get stories. Well, personally, I don't come across many stories when you hear about, you know, a lad in McDonald's that slipped on a bit of onion and died, and then he's haunting the place. You know what I mean? You don't hear that stuff. You always hear of presences that are far gone in history. So it's fascinating. It really is. But yeah, it's a hospital. And I'm sure every nurse and doctor have got a story or a tale. In fact, if you have, send them to me, because I would love to read it out. So that's it for episode 11 of the Terror Cellar, where shadows speak and reality blurs. Remember, not every knock at the door is someone you know. Until next time, keep the lights low and your wits sharp. Don't have nightmares. Bye bye.